having a conversation. All of you are here because you're in the physics club, right?
Yep.
Okay. How many seniors? How many juniors? Sophomores? Freshmen? Cool. So if I say Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, can anybody tell me what that is? Okay, good. We're going to get into some quantum physics. It'll be fun. How many of you are here in the physics club because you want to really become a physicist, but it just maybe something you're exploring? As a freshman in high school, you've got a lot of exploring you can do. Who's convinced they want to end up being a physicist? Okay, good. You have your options open. What other professions are you considering? Math, excellent. Engineering. A few heads went like this. I am a double E PhD from the University of Houston. My entire career got set on a path that I'm going to talk quite a bit about here, making better and better lithography tools. Can anybody tell me what a lithography tool is? Lithography used to mean carving stone. Nowadays, in the modern world, lithography refers to the instruments that make integrated circuits, make the patterns that they make integrated circuits out of. And back when I first got interested in lithography, the resolution, the size of things that they could print was 1 micron. Now, who can tell me how big a micron is?
1 million microns in 1 meter.
1 million microns makes a meter, exactly right. Okay, so a micron was the best resolution. Actually, they were claiming that there was a real serious barrier at 1 micron, and that nobody would be able to make, it would be really, really hard to make things smaller than a micron. The 1 micron barrier wasn't even a speed bump. Okay, very quickly they went from a micron to a half a micron to a quarter micron. Now we're going to talk about something smaller than a micron, a nanometer. Okay, how big is a nanometer? 1 billionth of a meter, very good. Okay, but a billion, that's 9 orders of magnitude. Okay, so I want to ask you this. If the great state of Texas, from Texarkana to El Paso, was 1 meter, how big would a nanometer be? Just a guess.
An inch?
An inch? Not a bad guess. Somebody once told me, I don't know, the size of Abilene. No, but if you know your metric system, and you know it's 600 miles from El Paso to Texarkana, that's right at a kilometer being right about 0.6 of a mile. So it's about 1,000 kilometers from Texarkana to El Paso. Okay, so now with the metric system, tell me how big a nanometer would be if the great state of Texas was a meter across. But you just have to go 9 orders of magnitude. Okay, 1,000 kilometers to a kilometer, 3 orders of magnitude. A kilometer to a meter, another 3 orders of magnitude. A meter to a 1,000th of a meter? A millimeter. So the answer is, if the great state of Texas was a meter across, the answer would be 1 millimeter or 5/100ths of 1 inch. Okay, that's pretty big ratio, 9 orders of magnitude. So we at Zybex Labs, a little tiny company, I'm about to lie to you. The first person to actually show that you could make a feature that was 1 nanometer is a professor at University of Illinois named Joe Lighting, and he showed you could take a scanning tunneling microscope. Who can tell me what a scanning tunneling microscope is? That's okay. There's a lot of college people that don't know what that is. It's an invention by Gerhard Benning and Heini Rohr at IBM Zurich that the popular press would tell you is the first time that you could actually image atoms. Turns out that's not true, that they're off by about 30 years. On my birth year, 1951, a guy at the University of Chicago made an field ion microscope, which allowed him to look at the atoms at the end of a very sharp tungsten tip. But that wasn't very useful for very many things, and the scanning tunneling microscopes turned out to be a wonderful surface science tool where you can actually image atoms at the surface of something. But Joe Lighting and Faden and Boris figured out a way to make a much smaller thing. But that's actually not where I wanted to start the lecture. I thought I was just killing time. So we'll pretend like things have officially started at this point in time. And I've learned a little bit about you, thank you. But I'm going to start off talking about something that's not really a physics subject, but Tristan suggested that you would be interested, okay? And it's going to be about biomedical devices. And actually, let's see. Well, we can do it this way. Well, first of all, a little bit about my little bitty company, Zyvex. It's done a lot of pretty amazing things. I'm going to tell you mainly about what we're doing here, but I'm going to start off and talk about our spin-off, Telemetry, that's making biomedical devices. First of all, to tell you about the biomedical devices, I got to give you a little bit of background on some of the things that have been done. And the human eye is something that's an interesting thing. The human eye is not a great example of what you would call intelligent design, because the light-sensing portion of your eye, the retina, has all the rods and cones. That's what you look at, what your light sensors. That's on the back of the retina, and the nerves come forward and out to the front. So much so that when the nerves all gather together and come back through, you've got a blind spot. You hardly ever notice it, but each and every one of you has a blind spot in your vision. The brain takes care of it, you never notice it. It's pretty insignificant. But also pretty interesting is the density of rods and cones is greatest at this place called the fovea, or the macula. Your high resolution vision is restricted to actually a very small portion of your vision. Okay, you think you can see everything in high resolution because you move your eyes around. But in fact, it's very tiny. It's about the size, the really high resolution portion of vision is about the size of your thumbnail at arm's length. Let me try to demonstrate that. Okay, so don't cheat on this. I want you to look exactly at that square in the middle that says read me. Okay, look at that. Don't move your eyes away just from that. This will cause you to want to cheat and try not to. Okay, there's some other things. Don't move your eye. Can you read without moving your eye what it says in those things out there? No, okay. How about now? The next one. Without moving your eye. Again, it's really hard to see things away from that little bitty region. Now you can look. Okay, so your really high resolution vision is just in that particular spot in your eye. And so when one of the best guy I ever hired is a guy named Randall. I hired him in 2001. He was an aerospace engineer, but a fabulous, and I do mean fabulous engineer, really unusual. A mutual friend introduced us to Yossi Gross and Essie Cohen, who had started up a biomedical device incubator company in Israel, and they kind of came to visit us, and they went out to lunch with my boss at the time, and the guy that founded Zyvex and all the Zyvex companies, and he didn't like to do anything unless it was really hard and really spectacular. They succeeded. He talked them into going after an artificial retina. Okay. Now there were people working on an artificial retina at University of Southern California, but their approach they knew was wrong and wasn't going to work. And the reason it wasn't going to work, remember I said that you've got all these nerves coming in from all over the place. They were putting their electrodes on the surface of the retina. So even though they put like up to 60 different little electrodes on the surface of the retina, nobody could, if you put them in a dark room and there was a lit doorway, they could tell what direction the lit doorway was. or they could tell if it was day or night, but that was about it. And so we realized that we were going to have to make something that penetrated through all the nerves into the regions just right around the rods and cones. The problem is nobody had such an array of tips. So Rahul came up with a way with silicon processing. I actually played a small role in one of the patents that made that possible. And so the idea is you push in beyond the surface of the set of electrodes right in front of the rods and cones. You pump electrical energy into that. Well, how you pump electrical energy, how you do? Well, you take a 600 pixel custom CMOS imager, so it's a little camera, but it's only got 600 pixels. And all in the world it does is it turns the intensity of light landing on any one pixel to control the frequency of current pulses coming about one and only one electrode. It has some other things. The other real problem with the Second Sight was the name of the company, and eventually implanted about 200 people worldwide, was you had to wear this separate little camera on a set of glasses. They had to come in and have a little magnetic feed-through right behind the ear. They had to go in and actually do surgery that penetrated the sclera, the outside of the eyeball, and came in and made this patch of 60 surface electrons, etc. It took 4 to 6 hours to do the operation. Okay, instead, and to get power to it, instead, we're going to say, well, let's build some gallium arsenide photovoltaics in there, and let's shine with a set of glasses that Zeiss made for us, shine an infrared light in and power the thing up. Not only that, you can modulate that and do a little bit of programming of the device. Long story short, it made something that worked outrageously well. In human clinical trials, for not everybody, but about 9 to 10 patients were actually had the thing implanted. Now, the length of time it took to put this in, all the surgeon has to do is pretty much like cataract surgery. It takes about 15 minutes. They make a little small incision. They've got a little thing that comes through and make sure that they push those electrodes into the macula, the fovea. Then the person has to wear these glasses for a while because it's sending electrical impulses into the brain in a way that the brain's not used to. But after a certain period of time, the brain adjusts. We're going to come back to that. The brain can readjust the way it works. And when you do, after they did that, then people began to see one particular, all the clinical trials were done in Belgium, in Europe. The one example I'm going to give is a guy named Franz. No, it wasn't Franz. Oh, a guy with a Belgian sounding name. Hans got implanted, and he got to the point where he really, the first thing they knew, the problem is they got implanted just before COVID started. And so they got implanted, and then the amount of interaction they could have with the patients that had been implanted got cut way back. But they sent this nurse in every 2 weeks to see, was he wearing his glasses and trying to learn how to do it. The second or third time she shows up, he goes, "Oh, I see you're not wearing your glasses today." He could see well enough to tell whether or not she was wearing glasses. At some point in time later, he's learned how to, what they call ambulatory vision, which means he's better than ambulatory vision. He can get up, walk around, and not bump into things, and make it through doorways, and can't read anything very well. But his wife one day says, "Look, I've got to go run an errand." And he goes, "Wait a minute, we've got company coming over." And she goes, "You'll be okay." So she leaves. Well, the company shows up, knocks on his door. He opens up the door, has him come in, has him sit down in his living room, says, "Would you like something to drink?" They say, "Sure, we want beer." Well, in Belgium, an important part here is in Belgium, all the beer bottles are different shapes, okay? So he couldn't read the labels, but he could see the shape of the beer bottles. So they said, "Okay, we'll have, a Corzendonk and a Duvel," and whatever they picked. He went into his kitchen, got the beers out, bring the glasses out, open the beers, and pour the beers. Okay, this is sadly the company that was doing all this went bankrupt, and that didn't actually get used, but we created something that literally returned sight to the blind. Not perfect vision by any means, but enough that really changed their lives. Once that was done, Rahul was looking around for something else to do. And, oh, by the way, this is next to a pencil. That's the size of this little implant that it puts in. Okay, now, what we didn't know at the time is that the biomedical device industry was ridiculously conservative. And when I say ridiculously conservative, for good reason. You're going to put something in somebody's body, you want to be very careful, it's not going to do any harm, it's not going to cause any problems. But 1958 was the first active biomedical device that got implanted. It was a pacemaker, okay? And they put a battery that ran this pacemaker. It just put in regular pulses to get the heart to beat on a regular basis in a good way. And they put the battery inside a titanium tin can that they hand welded it shut, okay? Today, they're using the same stupid welding of a tin. The batteries have gotten a little smaller, but they hand weld a battery instead of a titanium tin can, okay? We're close to 70 years later, that's what they're still doing. They make 95% of the things that go into the human body one at a time by hand. Now, I promise you, there's no way that you can make these things by hand, okay? This is modern electronics and MEMS technology that Rahul, before he knew any better, designed and made work. So, once that was done, we were looking for other things to do. We ran into Rob Renneker, a professor at UC Dallas, and he's an ex-Marine, and he realized that a lot of his buddies that came back from wars had PTSD and other real problems, and he was working in an area they called targeted plasticity therapy. And so, long story short, Rahul started working on targeted plasticity therapy. But just like we looked at the eyeball, I think we need to look a little bit at nerves. Now this gets not much physics here. Well, actually there's a lot of physics here, but it's physics we don't understand very well. Biology is really complicated. But here's a nerve, okay? The nerves have these long axons and the shorter dendrites, and they connect to other nerve cells. But basically learning, either short-term or long-term learning, is by something called a synapse, which controls the interaction of any one nerve with a bunch of other nerves. But you can increase or decrease the ability of that thing to the amplitude with which it communicates signals. Okay, and so literally, if you could somehow change those, you can literally rewire the brain. And so there's this thing called targeted plasticity therapy, and I'm going to use the example of PTSD as an example to how this sort of mechanism works against you sometimes, okay? If you're a soldier and you're out in the Gulf War or something, and some improvised explosive device goes off right near you, your brain immediately, it's a panic, your brain just goes, wow, and it excites this vagus nerve that runs up the left side of your neck and floods the brain with acetylcholine, a neurotransmitter. And that neurotransmitter, that huge amount of that allows the synapses to change their strength, either get greater or less. And the hack that makes this work is that only those portions of the brain that are active at the time get changed. So the problem is the improvised explosive device goes off. The brain tells you, oh my God, you're about to die, and it immediately remembers everything it possibly can about the environment, okay? Then you take that person that's gone through that and survived, anything that reminds them from that just drives them into panic. And so some of the people that, we made a bunch of, Rahul made a bunch of these are bigger than that, but not much. That's like 1.5 by 2.5 by 3.5 microns, millimeters. This is like 4 by 8 millimeters, a little bit bigger. And it's only got 2 electrodes. It doesn't have 600 electrodes, it only has 2 electrodes, and it gets strapped onto the vagus nerve. at the time, I already kind of told this, at the time, everybody's putting in these titanium tin cans, and so there is something on the market right now, mainly to treat drug-resistant epilepsy, that has a little routine basis. It's exciting the vagus nerve, and exactly why that works, they're still studying, but it really does significantly reduce epileptic seizures. But so instead of that, we make this ridiculous, targeted plasticity therapy works like this. Rewriting the brain is not different. The brain does it by itself. But when, say, you have a stroke or spinal cord injury and it interrupts the brain's connection between you and your arm, if you try the best, if you're down to about 10% use of your limb, and there's ways of calculating that people have worked out, the best physical therapy, you might hope to get back to 30% use of that limb. But with this targeted plasticity therapy, and the way that works is there is a physical therapist or therapist that's watching the person, and they ask the person to try to move your arm. If they have any success at all moving their arm, they hit this button, it zaps the vagus nerve, it floods the brain with acetylcholine, and whatever portion of their brain was able to move that arm a little bit now gets new connections. So with a combination of the physical therapy and this targeted plasticity therapy, people have gotten back to 80 or even 90% use of the limb. They don't need to have a new limb. They can just rewire their brain to run the old one. And so these have been delivered to the Texas Biomedical Device Center that's run out of UTD. And they've done 3 major clinical trials, one for PTSD, one for stroke injury and spinal cord, and one for spinal cord injury. The stroke and spinal cord were about regaining use of the limb. The PTSD was for people, they picked 9 people that had really high levels of PTSD. They've got some way of measuring that. But I mean, I learned a little bit about some of the patients. There was this woman that she just lived in her house. She never went out of her house. She would never let anybody into her house. People would deliver stuff to her door and ring the bell, and she'd wait till they went away, and she'd come out and get the stuff and come back in. There was another guy that wasn't quite that bad, but he didn't have a job. Neither of them had a job. They both basically lived in their house. At the end of 3 months of therapy, both of these people they got jobs. The woman moved to a new house. At the end of 3 months, whatever procedure you go through to determine if somebody has PTSD, these 9 patients had really high levels of PTSD. After the 3 months of therapy, none of them were diagnosed with PTSD. So this is an amazing amount of rewiring the body, and I'm really proud of what Randall did. And that's still under, they're not going to get actually into human use, well, besides the human trials, for it's going to take a lot more money and more time. But so this is just an example of how, this is what, there's another, the existing vagus nerve stimulator is that big. That's Rahul's version. Okay, and you actually, instead of using light, he's now using magnetic, near-field magnetic. So you only need to wear a little collar that powers the thing up while you're taking therapy. Once it works, yeah, it's going. You don't have to wear that little collar anymore. If you want it, it's again a very short 15-minute surgery to detach that vagus nerve stimulator. So I've talked about that. Now I want to talk about something completely different, and this involves some physics. And I've taken longer than that I meant to. So I'm going to go semi-quickly. The integrated circuit industry has dramatically changed almost everybody's, anybody in a first world nation has dramatically changed the nation, the way people operate. Well, none of you are old enough, maybe even some of your parents aren't old enough to remember when all of our information technology was analog information. We had telephones that you could talk to somebody within the same town. If you had to talk to somebody in a long distance, The sound was terrible. We had TVs, okay, they were black and white, or got to be color, but they had cathode ray tubes. We had plastic discs with wiggly grooves in them, they were called records. We had cassette tapes, but we didn't have any computers. We certainly didn't have any cell phones. We didn't have any internet. It's completely and totally changed the world, and it really started off here in Texas. With Jack Kilby at Texas Instruments, made the first integrated circuit, had a few transistors in it. Any idea of how many transistors in a state-of-the-art integrated circuit nowadays? We started off with half a dozen, 3 or 4 maybe. And how many
Hundreds of
transistors
billions?
now? Huh?
Hundreds of billions?
Close. 63 billion is the current thing that TSMC can make. So that's a good guess. Okay, now the transistors are, to get them that many, you had to make things smaller and smaller and smaller to put more and more transistors on a single chip. And so this is a little history of 1984, when I started really getting involved in thinking about semiconductor lithography. To get the smaller and smaller stuff, you had to go in shorter and shorter wavelengths. This was up, it's still an ultraviolet wavelength, about 365 nanometers. And then we went to something at about 250 nanometers. Then we got down to something sort of 193. And now we're actually sitting all the way down at 13.5 nanometers. Okay? And that's allowed us to make smaller and smaller stuff. If we kept up with this trend, we might be all the way out here, and that's about 4 nanometers, which is X-rays. But it's at the same time, if we look at the cost of the mask set, by the way, you have to make a bunch of different masks that have the pattern that you want. It used to be it was a few dozen masks. It's now coming up close to 100 different layers have to be built up to make the integrated circuit. So the tool cost back in '84 cost $1 million. Okay, boy, that sounds like a lot of money. Well, the latest tools that have just sold to Intel, for instance, $380 million. Okay, and that's actually a problem, because if you want to bring out a new, the semiconductors are almost always at the front of new, really exciting new products, because you can, even if you're, it's hard to find a product that doesn't either have transistors in them, or you didn't use a computer with a lot of transistors to design the product. So it's really the most, and this is a biased opinion, but the most important technology on the planet. Okay, it has more impact on a wider variety of things than anything else. The problem is, where we are now, the tools gone from $1 million, and so now it's up at over $100 million. This point is about $200 million. The latest tool is about $400 million. And so this is kind of tracking a bunch of different things. If we keep going in the same direction we're going, we're going to end up with a single mask that you make. You need about 100 masks, let's say. A single mask, which used to be a few $1,000s, uses millions of dollars. It's going to be $500,000. It's already about that. It's good. It would be $5 billion. Excuse me, it means $500 million. It would be $5 billion. It's way too expensive. Okay, so we're going to have to do something different, and that's what I spent a large amount of time and effort doing. A little more thing. One of the advantages of Moore's law is you make transistors smaller and smaller. This is dropping over the last, between 1970 and a little past 2000. Almost 7 orders of magnitude. A lot cheaper transistors. You had to make it cheaper. But here's the problem. About 10 to 15 years ago, that price leveled off. So the transistors aren't getting any cheaper. The other thing that was happening, when you make smaller transistors, you could operate them faster. And so for the longest time, as we made the transistors smaller and smaller, the clock speed that runs your computers and your iPhones and everything else you've got was increasing. But again, about the same time, it sort of leveled off. So we're going to pay more and more money. Now, it's advantageous to put more and more transistors on a chip, but if they're not going down in price, the chips just get ridiculously expensive. So that's a problem. Now, fortunately, some guys down at UT Austin, that actually guys I know pretty well, Grant Wilson and S.V. Srinivasan, looked at a new technology that came out. Actually, it's not a new technology at all. If I say embossing, you can tell me what embossing is. You just take a little mold and you press it down into something, and whatever pattern you have on the mold, you pick up your embosser, it's made that pattern in whatever you're supposed. And that's been around for centuries, frankly. But Steve Chu at Princeton thought, well, what if we made embossers with little bitty tiny features? We can make some small stuff. And it turns out you really could. You could make some ridiculously small stuff. But they were using he came from the semiconductor background, where they're using what we call resists, which are a layer of polymer film. And normally the way that works, if you're doing photolithography, you shine light, and where the light shines, you make a pattern. Some places you're shining light, some places you're not. Where you shine the light, it changes. It usually takes either long polymer chains and chops them up into smaller polymer chains, or takes short polymer chains, gets them to cross-link to make longer polymer chains. And you can dissolve out with solvents the shorter polymers that either you've made or you've taken the short polymers and made them longer. So this is a resist, and people are used to doing that. So if you're going to push that into something solid, you have to push really hard. They could do that. They could heat it up a little bit to make it a little more viscous, and they could make patterns. It was cool, but guess what happens when you lean on something really hard and heat it up? It distorts. And all these masks that you use to make integrated circuits, they have to align really, really well. So you can make really small stuff, but you couldn't make them to where you could make masks that would align well to each other. SV and Grant get together, and I won't tell you the whole story, but they came up with a way of not using solid polymers, but using a UV curable epoxy with viscosity less than water, made the distortions a lot less. SV added some other stuff to it that made it cool. And so it is emerged. They're beginning to sell it into some of the same people that are buying these tools, but it has some huge advantages. It's way simpler. When I say way simpler, it's orders and orders of magnitude simpler. And it's much lower cost because it's a lot simpler. It actually has better precision, has potential resolution higher than they're ever going to get with cost effectively with photolithography. But the big problem it has is the way that masks are made. And who's trying to interrupt me? No way. Somebody's got to make these patterns that either the nano imprint mask, you got to make the mask, or for the photolithography, you got to make a mask that has a pattern that gets demagnified and used to expose the transistors to make up transistors. And it turns out that let's see if I've got this in here. Yeah, for the longest time, lithography is done with electron beams. You focus down the electron beam to a little bitty spot, and you can make really small spots. You scan it around, and you turn your long polymer chains into short polymer chains. But it's serial. It's just one little beam running around. But it also, after working a lot of times to get the optics to where you can make a really small spot size, and to do that, you need to run up to really high energies. You can make a ridiculously small spot size, but you get forward scattering, the electrons scatter with the resist as it goes through. You get back scattering because they're really high energy electrons, so they go down and they back scatter. You also get so-called volume plasmons. You take a relativistic electron, when moving fast, close to the speed of light, and you blow through that resist, and it makes a charge wave that goes out for several nanometers and exposes other stuff. And also the thing that really exposes are secondary electrons that are knocked off the polymers. So it turns out that this is the right in the center of the beam. This is normalized. You get this sort of amount of electrons exposing the resist. When it goes out, has really long tail. So you got to go out about 4 nanometers away before you're even down to 10% of the energy that's being deposited. It turns out, so it's sloppy. It can't make really sharp stuff. Now another big problem was single beam for the EUV, the short wavelength EUV, 13.5 nanometers. It was taking forever to write these things because you got to use a smaller spot. Well, let's say you have to paint this wall. Okay, are you going to pick a roller or are you going to pick a watercolor paintbrush? Roller. Yeah. But the problem is the roller can't make the fine features that you want to make, so you have to use your watercolor paintbrush, and so it takes a long, long time. And there's this thing called Tenet's law that's really interesting, but it turns out it's worse than just getting the beam smaller. It has some other effects. You improve your resolution, the ability to make things smaller by a factor of 2. You figure, well, if that's sort of square, you got an area of what you're doing. It's got to be at least 4 times as long. It's not 4 times as long. It's 32 times as long for some complex physics reasons that I don't really understand. Because I haven't bothered to think about it. But so, guys in Vienna, Austria that I know came up with a multi-beam mask writer that sped things up. They took 250,000 beamlets, separately controlled beamlets, turning them off and on, scanning them around. But electrons are charged particles. And in a vacuum, where these charged particles are streaming through, they interact with each other. So they had to back so far off on the current. Now, this is physics. I've got 2 charged particles. They do the same thing. They push each other away. They had to back off so far on the current. With 250,000 beamlets, they only got a mask writing, the increase the time it took to write a mask, a factor of 10x. Now that 10x was important, okay? And that allowed the EUV mask to be made. That's a great thing. But for nano imprint, this is a real problem because of these long tails, the smallest thing that you can make is about 15 nanometers. And the high NA tool that's come out just a short while ago for the EUV can do 8 nanometers, and so that's a real problem. So now we get into some interesting physics, okay? Now, I asked anybody who knew what Heisenberg's uncertainty principle is. It turns out in quantum physics, I mean, in everything, in the world, in the universe as we know it, there's a certain amount of ambiguity built in to the universe. That you cannot know exactly how big something is, how fast it's moving, where it is. There's a certain amount of uncertainty in the position. If I say wave-particle duality, that ring any bells for anybody? Yeah. Just explain wave-particle duality.
Isn't it so if like a particle is getting observed, it changes like how it acts?
Well, yes, basically, this really manifests itself only at really small sizes, but electrons, even protons, you can look at them like they're charged they're actually a particle, but you can also look at them like they're a wave. And it turns out they behave depending upon how you look at them. Okay? And when they're in not a particle, but in a wave, even if they're a particle, there's a distribution of where you can't say exactly where they are. There's a distribution, a little Gaussian curve, more or less. So it might be here, but it might be here, but it might be here. And if you have a little energy barrier that's small enough, here I'm going to mess up somebody's microphone, I should say. Classically speaking, if I've got an energy barrier that looks like this, and I've got a particle that's only got this much energy, there's no way it gets through there because it didn't have enough energy to get over the top. But as it turns out, quantum mechanically, if this particle has a distribution that looks like that, it might be over here. So they do what they call quantum mechanical tunneling. And this works particularly well for electrons. Bigger things have a very, very small uncertainty. Even protons, which are considerably more massive than electrons, there's a little bit of uncertainty in their position, but not much. But electrons is a much larger uncertainty. So in fact, what happens is the way that I make really, really small things is I take a metal tip, bring it down close to the surface. Now normally the surface, the silicon surface I'm working on is a bunch of atoms, they're little bumps, but I just made it simplified, said I'm just going to treat it like it's an infinitely flat curve. I bring this tip down about a nanometer away, and there's a formula I can use to calculate how many electrons, the shorter distance, the longer that distance gets, the less electrons are going to be able to tunnel. So this blue line is the distribution, and remember this distribution I showed you out here. You go out to 4 nanometers, and you're down 10%. You get a 4/10 of a nanometer, and you're about down 10%. But it's not just that. There's also another quantum mechanical effect going on that has to do with the electrons coming down. I've got what I didn't tell you is we take a silicon surface and we heat it up to drive all the impurities off, and we throw in atomic hydrogen, and the crystal structure of the silicon has it, after we go through this heat process, has a single hydrogen atom sticking to a single surface silicon atom. And what I do is I come in and I break that silicon hydrogen bond with a low energy electrons, okay, something like 4 or 5 volts, very low energy electrons. But any one electron does not have, if you go up to 10 volts, actually more like 7 volts, you've got enough energy in a single electron to come in and break that silicon hydrogen bond. It actually raises it up to a higher electronic state, and it's much easier for it to escape. But at 5 volts, it just doesn't have enough energy to do that. So it takes a bunch of them, and it's competing with phonons. If I say phonon, we're going to come back to wave particle duality here. Who can tell me what a phonon is? It's a particle of sound. Okay, a photon is a particle of light. Okay, a phonon is a particle of sound. It turns out at any temperature above absolute zero, you got some phonons running around. It turns out the phonons reduce, so you're building up by these secondary electron hits on the silicon hydrogen bond, you're building up kinetic energy. And so it makes the hydrogen wiggle up and down, but if it doesn't overcome the strength of the bond, it doesn't get away. And the phonons reduce that kinetic energy. So it's a race, okay? So it's not actually a dose, but a dose rate over a given period of time builds up enough kinetic energy that hydrogen atom, pop, just goes off the surface. And because I've got a ridiculously small confinement of electrons, which I can affect the width of that by going to higher voltages or higher currents, I can really pick it out. And what we do is we arrange it so we can knock off. When you heat up the silicon, it makes these beautiful little diamond rows. You can sort of see them here and see them here. Those are pairs of hydrogen atoms on the silicon surface, on top of the silicon atoms. I can go through with a tip and pop off just those hydrogen atoms. So I've got now a sub the width of that line is less than a nanometer. Okay, very, very small. So, but you've got this distribution, but it turns out it takes the number of electrons it takes to break that depends on the current. Because the more electrons are coming in, it stays ahead of the phonons that are trying to drop the energy back down. So this is also a 5th order effect. So I can make a ridiculous, this is the E-beam lithography when you're using high energy electrons. There's the distribution of electrons I've got, which allows me to do essentially perfect patterning. And with perfect patterning, we're now down to digital. We're at the precipice of a new digital revolution. You guys didn't live through the first one of it, but you're getting all the benefits of it. You will, I believe, live through a second digital revolution in at least atomic scale fabrication. Okay, and I don't know, that's just so cool, I can't believe it. And we are doing very close to perfect patterning, and that's gonna allow us to do a lot of things. And so the other thing is I can back off the current, so where I'm at a couple of volts and 100 picoamps, I can still do imaging, but I don't break the silicon hydrogen bonds. So I can use this silicon lattice as an address grid. Okay, in computers, you can change bits because you have a memory and you know where those bits are in memory. So you can use an address to go and change that information. Well, I've got an address that I can access and say, where do I want to remove those hydrogen atoms? Here's an example where I've removed exactly 44 hydrogen atoms, little blue circles where we knock the hydrogen atoms off. So if you can make things that are perfect, that has huge advantages. Let's see, what else do I want to tell you? Well, here's some examples. Here's some better images of the diamond rows. You can see the little sort of bulges there, which are 2 atoms wide. A guy named Bob Volko, up in Canada, proud Canadian that he was, he wanted at the sesquicentennial of Canada, 150-year anniversary of Canada being formed, he wanted to make 150, and he also wanted to make a Canadian maple leaf. And so he went ahead and popped off some hydrogen atoms, but he popped off one he didn't need to, and he missed one here. So it's easy to come back where you missed one and pop it off, but it's not so easy to put a hydrogen atom back down where you mistakenly took one away. He's got a process that's not manufacturable, but he can actually go pick up a hydrogen atom and put it back down where so it no longer is a dangling bomb. And so you can do interesting things. James Owen, a Brit, is my chief scientist, was going to Japan to give a lecture, and the Hello Kitty meme is really popular in Japan. And so he associated this is a binary bitmap, so certain pixels are white and other pixels are black. So we just take this thing and say, okay, that's the pixels I want to remove. We send it through a program that tells the tip where to go to remove those. And so presto changeo, you've got, just by putting in a binary bitmap and turning on the machine, it automatically creates this. He's also an Oxford lad. And so he wanted to make an Oxford logo, same thing. He just takes a binary bitmap, just a black and white image, a digital image of that, and it tells the tip where to go, and he makes the world's smallest Oxford logo. We've done a lot of other work that's very important. Scanning tunneling microscopes use piezoelectric actuators to move the tip around. People, for moving very small distances, love piezoelectric actuators because you apply a voltage to something that's, the tubes are about 1 inch long and half an inch in diameter, and you get them to bend and move the tip around or get shorter or longer. But you have to apply pretty large voltages to get it to move any distance at all, so they're inefficient from that point of view. But also they have something called creep and hysteresis. And these are 2 positioning errors. The creep is as you might imagine, is a time varying error. You apply a voltage, it would have the tip move 10 nanometers. So it moves 9 nanometers right away, and the last nanometer, it slows way down and asymptotically approaches. It takes several hours before it stops moving any distance that we can measure. But then you tell it to go back to that's the creep. But then you tell it, you put the same voltage you used to have on it, but it doesn't get all the way there. It stops before it gets there. So these are 2 really major problems if you want to do accurate lithography that you have to solve. I have a tall, skinny string theorist, not named Sheldon. The Big Bang Theory. Tell me some of you have watched The Big Bang Theory. Okay, good. He's a curious guy. He always thinks he's the smartest guy in the room. That works for Sheldon and Udi. Udi's more polite, but he's also hard to manage because he only does what he thinks he ought to be doing. Nobody told him to solve that problem. He just goes off. 30 years people were working on this, never got anywhere. Or never got anywhere that was any good. So if you try to make this square array of squares, what we want to make, but you don't correct for creep or hysteresis, it's not a square array and you don't get squares. They're either squished or spread out. When you apply just the hysteresis correction, they end up where you want them to be, but they're still not squares. You do the creep and hysteresis correction and you come up with nice squares. This is, I'd love to show this example. That's 10 by 10 pixels for you on 4 surface atoms or a pixel. That's 10 by 10 pixels, which ends up being 7.7 nanometer squares. Nobody on the planet Earth can come anywhere near that kind of resolution and precision. We're trying to build that up. we're doing it in a research tool. We're trying to build it up to a autonomous tool. The other thing is, the problem with STMs is they crash their tips all the time. This is a gallery of tip crashing, that pictures that we took after the tips have crashed. They crash in funny ways and make funny sort of shapes. I had no idea why these tips were crashing. We brought a guy from Australia, Reza Mohimani. He's Iranian actually, but got his education in Australia. He was a professor at University of New South Wales in Australia. Mark Spong, then Dean of Engineering at UTD, says, I want to bring that guy here. So I helped in some way to get this guy here. He's been here for 10 years. That's the first problem I gave him. He says, stop crashing tips. He's a control system expert. It took him a little while, and his student Fareed figured it out, but then they understood their complex reasons why, but they understood why the tip was crashing. And so this is what current is measured when a tip is not running his algorithm. They ring because it gets out of the stable region of the thing that controls it. With his algorithm, it's not crashing tips anymore. Extremely important, really worthwhile. So what do we do with, I can take hydrogen atoms off, so what? Did you have a question, or you just scratching your head?
No question.
Not a question? Okay. We remove hydrogen atoms. There's usually resist, you're there to resist etches into a surface. You gotta go? Okay. But a monolayer of hydrogen atoms doesn't stop any kind of an etch, I know. But we do selective deposition because the covalent bonds, the unsatisfied, atoms are like people. They're not happy until all their needs are satisfied. If you're a silicon atom, it's a group 4 element. It wants to make contact with 4 neighboring silicon atoms. When you, or some kind of atom, so when the hydrogen atoms are gone, makes for a very reactive surface, okay? And so we can deposit stuff there, and then we can etch down into the surface, we can make little patterns. Those can go into be used, we think, pretty effectively for the nano imprint, which needs much higher resolution. We can make much higher resolution than they can make with EUV, and I think this is going to be a great, wonderful thing. Just here's I think I'm going to show you this in stuff. I worked in Belgium for 2 years when I was working for TI at IMEC, and IMEC's been working with ASML that makes these big EUV tools to bring out their high NA, high numerical aperture. How many photographers we got? Nobody's a photographer? Who has a camera to take pictures with? They're pointing fingers at each other. The numerical aperture is the same on a camera. You open up the numerical aperture, what does that do? Come on, photographers, tell me. Let's more light in. Okay. It also reduces your depth of focus, but you go to a higher numerical aperture, you can actually make smaller things. So they've just brought out the higher numerical aperture, and they made this pattern, which is actually pretty impressive. But I saw that pattern, I saw it on his LinkedIn page, and I thought we can make that pattern. So we made it, but not at a 19 nanometer full pitch, we made it at 75% that size. Looked pretty good. I said, well, let's make it at 60% that size. Still looked pretty good. I said, let's make it at 40% of that size. This is at the same magnification that is. Instead of a 19 nanometer full pitch, we're at a 7.7 nanometer full pitch. And if you compare the images, you can see all the proximity effects. These things are not the same width. They wiggle around, they round off the corners. This is our exposures, straight lines and squared off ends. This is dramatically better lithography technology. The problem is, I'm doing it way too slow. I've got to speed it up, and we're going to speed it up. Okay, just a little bit more by using lots and lots of tips operating in parallel. Okay, but it's going to take a lot of tips. To make a long story short, I have a plan to put 3.7 million tips operating in parallel. You say, oh my God, 3.7, they're little MEMS actuators. How are you ever going to get that to be reliable? Well, as it turns out, I was working at TI at the time they made the digital light projector. Who's seen a movie in a movie theater recently? Okay, I guarantee you were looking at not film, not light shown through film, but light coming off of digital light projectors, which have a bunch of little, they have the cinema chips have 8.9 million little mirrors that flip back and forth and create the image that you see up on the screen. And so here's some of an example of the electronic stuff that I'm showing the optics here. I'm not talking about optics. I'm just talking about the thing that controls the little mirrors that flip back and forth. They have 8.9 million. They update the information to those mirrors at about the same rate that I'm going to update the tips to tell them to go in and out of lithography mode. The amazing thing is the electronics and the actual chips you can buy from TI for $5,000. I'm competing with a company that sells this multi-beam mask writer for $50 million. Okay? Now, it's not exactly apples to apples, but we're going to make a tool, if I can raise enough money, that will dramatically lower the cost. Well, the nano imprint tools are dramatically lower cost. Our tools dramatically lower cost that makes the mask. We'll get back down to where we can make cheap transistors again, really cheap, and keep lowering the price of them. And that'll have all sorts of good applications. So it will do a lot of really good and cool stuff, and I'm very excited about the chances that we have of really changing the industry here in Texas, where it all started, really. Silicon Valley, Texas has got a lot over what Silicon Valley and California is doing. I'm going to stop there and ask if you have any questions, and if you don't ask any questions, I'm going to make you listen to quantum jokes. Questions? Can you get, yeah, I'll tell you a quantum joke, but that's not the question, that's the sort of question I'm looking for. No curiosity about anything that I'm doing? Yes, sir.
Can I get a selfie with you?
Sure, not a problem. But hey, let's wait on that. I promise I will stick around and you can do that. Yes, sir.
I'll get your autograph.
If you want it. Yes.
How do you move the hydrogen atoms?
This is a great question. Okay. You can go in. What Bob Walker's done. It depends on the polarity, the voltage you put on the tip. So you can grab a hydrogen atom that's sitting somewhere else on a piece of silicon. You can attract it to the tip. Not every time, but generally it sticks to the end of the tip. Then you move over to a place where there is a missing hydrogen atom. All you have to do is get it close enough to where you're in the chemical bonds reach out and pull things in. So it's a non-trivial thing, but there's a lot of people talking about building things atom by atom. We're not at that point in time, because I want to remove atoms, a lot of atoms, and then bring something in and stick where those other atoms were gone. But there are people, one of the first really impressive things done that IBM did with an STM is a guy named Don Eigler, who's now retired, a really interesting guy. He took a scanning tunneling microscope, not working on silicon, but he took some helium, I believe, atoms, and he was working on a copper surface, and he could he could drag the helium atoms around. It wasn't helium, because they wouldn't be reacting, it was something else. Wasn't hydrogen, I forget at the moment. But he could drag the atoms around, chlorine maybe, and then release them, and they would sit on top of a silicon copper crystal, and he could make patterns with the atoms. Okay, but it took a while. You have to grab it, you have to drag it around, and you have to get it to let go. And I once had a chance to introduce him at a conference I helped put together as the world's most brilliant marketing physicist that there ever was. Because he could have made a square, he could have made a triangle, he could have spelled out his name. No, what he spelled out was the logo of his company, IBM, in atoms. 35 atoms spelled out IBM. And this made his company more than happy to take that image and just spread it out all over the world and showed it to many different places. So, which made him extremely popular within IBM. Marketing matters. Even if you're a physicist, marketing matters. So if you're going to make a pattern or you're going to do something and you can relate it to your company or something else, that's always valuable. Yes, sir.
Is there really any like commercial benefit to doubling transistors?
Are you kidding? Yes, huge benefits. Are you familiar with AI?
Yes.
Okay, you're familiar with the company NVIDIA.
Yeah.
They make the chips that makes AI. They're one of the richest companies on the planet, and the only reason they're rich is because this integrated circuit industry's figured out how to make chips with billions of transistors on them. Yes, there's a huge benefit to continue what we're calling Moore's Law. Gordon Moore said double the number of transistors on a chip every 2 to 3 years. Yeah, the industry, it's weird. It's still, by a lot of measures, not a huge industry, but it's approaching to be $1 trillion a year industry. But it affects so many other industries. It's just ridiculous. The IMS that I mentioned that made the multi-beam mask writer, I know the group in Austria that did that. They used to do ion lithography like I was doing, but they got that Intel put some money into them. I'm not sure, a few $1 billion they put into them in 2009. They're now valued at like $4 billion. So yes, there's a real national security interest in having the best semiconductor lithography. That means you can make the best products, which means your economy will do well. There's also some national security issues carried into that. I've spent a lot of time working towards making quantum computers, and I actually at Texas A&M this last Friday and Saturday they had the Texas Quantum Summit, and we had some of the real name brand quantum computing companies from not only from Texas but from all over the nation, and there's a huge amount of money and interest in that because, just real quickly, there's a guy named Peter Shor. What do you use quantum computing for? It turns out there's not that many things that is a whole lot better than classical computers, but there are a few things, including understanding quantum mechanics, which is really valuable, but all of our encrypted data is encrypted with a particular approach that is factors of prime numbers. Peter Shor came up with an algorithm that you could use on a quantum computer to break the encryption codes. So all of our adversaries have already broken into cyber systems and pulled out our most important secrets. They can't, but they're encrypted, they can't read them. If an adversary, China, Iran, somebody can manage to run Shor's algorithm and decrypt all of our information, we don't want to be second to that party. And so there's other people pumping a lot of money, but our Department of Defense and all the 3 other guys are pumping in huge amounts of money into quantum for exactly that reason. We can do a lot of other stuff, but that's something they're very scared about. I think we've probably gone well over time you expected to be here, and so I'm happy to let all of you go. I hope you learned a little bit about what I'm talking about. If you are the least bit interested in learning more things about the nonsense that we're doing, I'll make sure that Tristan's already got my email address, and so he can share that with you if you want to send me an email and ask a question about the quantum industry or engineering or physics. Feel free to do so. So with that said, those of you that would rather go off and do something else, you're free to go. Thanks for listening.